Oh, no, that's already on. That's fine.
That's fine?
We're muted.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Hi. Our next speaker is an iOS engineer at Reddit. She's a core team member of CocoaPods, and she's CTO and board member of Women Who Code. Michele Titolo.
Cool. Well, afternoon, everyone. I'm here today to talk about the project file. As was already said, I'm CTO and board member of Women Who Code. I work at Reddit, and I also work on CocoaPods. So everyone here who's actually here and who's listening to the live stream is here to talk about one thing, the project file. It can be kind of a beast, and it's one of those things that we don't really care about it until stuff starts going wrong. So sometimes it goes kind of wrong, you're just like, oh, this is annoying. And sometimes it goes really wrong, and you're just like, what's going on here? Three-way merge? What? But I'm here to demystify all this and tell everyone that this project file, all of this stuff, is really not that special. It's not something that you should be, oh my gosh, don't touch the project file, I'm adding files. It's not that special. It doesn't deserve to be placed on a pedestal. So, the xcodeproj. Most of you that have been doing iOS for a while, you know that it's a folder. Apple really likes doing these dot folders. And inside it are a bunch of files and folders. I'm just going to go through all of them. Inside, you'll find only two kinds of files. Believe it or not, there's only two types of files inside of this bundle. Everything is either a plist or an XML file. Everything. So even if it looks weird, trust me, it's plist or it's XML, and you can totally read it, you can write it, you can edit it. It also has all of your app settings, of course. So everything that's actually needed to build your app. We all know that Xcode can't compile anything without this file folder and information. And also all of your schemes. Schemes are really important for continuous integration purposes because sometimes you need to share them so that the continuous integration server can build your test scheme, for instance. So, diving in. First thing I'm going to talk about is your xcodeproj file because it's another special folder. Because we all know and love workspaces. If you work with CocoaPods, you frequently use a workspace. But inside of every Xcode project folder is also a workspace. And yes, if you open this, if you are in here and you actually open this, Xcode will open it just fine. And inside here, we have more files and folders. Apple really, really likes keeping everything super organized and super clean. So everything actually has a reason and a purpose. And I'm just going to talk about the xcodeproj, which is the most important thing, because it is just an XML file that references your xcodeproj. So yes, this is a file inside of a file folder that references that grandparent file folder. Yes. And this is all that it has. If you just create a new project in Xcode, it's really tiny. There's nothing to be scared of here. It's just XML. And as I said, workspaces are now first party. Apple loves workspaces, so everyone uses them. And inside, outside, they have the same exact structure. They just might list multiple. Everybody's favorite file ever, right? Who doesn't love this file? And I'm going to throw down some knowledge, which you may or may not know. This is a plist. It is a set of key value stored information, arrays, dictionaries, numbers. That's it. It is a very special plist. We all know because Xcode really doesn't like when you edit it and it's not right. But it really is the heart of your project. This contains all of the information that Xcode uses to compile. And without compiling, we don't have apps. So let's look inside. I'm just going to open one up. So easy to read, right? Right? I mean, there's a lot going on here. It's not exactly the easiest thing to read, especially because it's the old ASCII-style plists, which we actually are not allowed to write in OS X anymore. But let's break it down, because this is a plist and it has patterns. And Apple loves their patterns, so it's actually really easy to figure out what's going on once you learn about that. So there are two pieces that are really, really important. There's the objects key and the root object key at the very, very root of the file. Objects, this is the one that you usually get the most merge conflicts in. It looks kind of like this. It's a dictionary that has these really long, weird-looking keys that are also dictionaries, and it just keeps going ever and ever and ever. But the reason that this is really important is because every object in your project file has a UID. Everything. So every file, every build setting, every scheme, every target, everything has this UID. And why we think that they might be really random looking, they're actually not. If you ever add a group of, add 4 files to your Xcode project, and it'll be something like this where it looks really random, but then you see there are a couple sequential things in there. So there is somewhat of a method to the madness. And this is, at least how I think, partially how Apple keeps UIDs from being used at the same time. It's really rare that you'll actually have 2 different objects in this file that have the same ID. Root object is kind of where everything starts. It's the starting point for your application. And it's also kind of a beast. Just step on some rocks. But there's a bunch of really, really useful information here once you understand what's going on. So we have an ISA. We have a build configuration list. I'm going to go into more details, but I'm just highlighting them. So if you want to look this up in your file, you can see what the order that they're in. There's this main group thingamajiggy, which I'll get into, which is really important, and then targets. So ISA. We all know what this is. We have these in Objective-C all the time. It's referencing a class. If you've ever had Xcode crash, you'll find classes that look like this, all prefixed with PBX. So every single object has a class associated with it, everything. So you don't know what's going on, look at the class. Main group. Main group. So everything has an ID, and so this main group is the ID of the first thing that Xcode should open. Pretty simple. Targets lists all of your targets. Again, all of these UIDs, which is why they're really super important and why Xcode hates you when you take them out. Project references, so if you have subprojects, the UIDs of the subprojects. And build configuration list. This is build settings, all of the things when you go and actually have the project file clicked in Xcode. This is what goes in there. So I've spent a lot of time breaking these apart and putting them back together because, well, why not? It's fun. And I actually found these are all of the classes that are inside that project folder. And they all look pretty easy to read. You have sources build phase, version group, configuration list, native target, legacy target. These are all things that we know and use. They might have slightly different names, but there's order and there's method to the madness, I swear. And there's a little bit more to say about some of these things because some of them are really cool. What Apple does is really cool. So we're going to get friendly with some of them. The first is XC build configuration. I'm going to refer to these all by class now because you can literally just do a search on your PBX proj and you will be able to see this stuff. And that's what this is. And one thing to note here is that this is always a diff. So Xcode has a bunch of standards that unless you change it, they won't actually show up here, which is why this is not 30,000 million lines long with all the different compiler flags. So you usually have debug and release build configurations, just like what Xcode creates for you automatically. This is also where all your compiler flags are stored, as I mentioned. But these are only this different than what Xcode expects project flags. So I'm just going to go through some of them. This is one. I don't bother reading it. It's kind of weird, but there are some really interesting things, like this is where your code signing identity is stored, which is how if you have a release versus a debug code signing, it's listed in here. Your GCC version, now we have, the slide's a bit old, now we have the newer compilers with LLVM. well, it's still GCC version even though you're using an LLVM compiler because Apple. Your info plist file. So if your app ever can't find the info plist, you can change it here. For whatever reason, someone changes it. Your product name. These are pretty self-explanatory because we've changed these settings so many times in our apps that, you know, the first time I looked at this, I did not expect it to just be like, oh, it's the exact same word that it is in Xcode. The provisioning profile was added in Xcode 5. So those of you that haven't used that feature of Xcode 5, you can actually select a specific provisioning profile instead of just having it kind of select one that matches your developer certificate. And they're all named. So this one just happens to be a debug thing. So yeah, compiler flags, project settings. It's really not that hard. And it's all key values. You can search these. And I'm just going to talk about Swift because Swift is out. And I only found 2 compiler flags that were actually added. You have a bridging header and an optimization level, and that's it. So Swift actually really isn't that special. So, and these are, just like with anything else, you can have build configurations at the project or the target level. And they're referenced exactly the same. One of the things as you go through, and if you actually ever look at one of these files, you'll see things that look exactly the same except for like the name of something like over and over and over and over and over and over again. Because Apple would rather do that and be very explicit and let you have really fine-grained control rather than going through and saying, well, this one's different in that way, and that one's different in that way, and that one's different in that way, because that's just a pain. So, targets. PBX native target. Exactly what you think it is. This is a target. And this has some other things, like the build configuration. So your build configuration doesn't reference your target. Your target references a build configuration, just like it does in Xcode. Your build phases, because obviously everything is an object. So even your build phases are referenced as objects. So this is just a list of the UIDs in your build phases, and they are ordered. So if you ever wanted to, like, I don't know, if one of these is the CocoaPods, if you wanted to have that run first, I don't know why you'd want to do that. But if you change it in this file and then close and reopen Xcode, it'll change. And that's one of the great things about knowing how to edit this file, especially when you're dealing with like version control problems, is if you're just like, oh, why is it the top? You can try and figure out how to do it in the new Xcode, but it's kind of weird. Or you can just be like, I'm going to copy and paste this at the end, and done. Your target has a name, exactly what you think it would be. And the product name, which is, I found them to be exactly the same. I changed one of them and nothing changed. So this one is technically the bundle display name, but they're usually the same. So build phases. This is one of my favorite things. I love continuous integration. It's kind of one of the things that I love most to set up whenever I'm working on a project. So I always play a lot around with build phases and build types. But these are the ones that are kind of strangely named. So for the most part, these names are really easy. You have targets, build configurations, file references, groups, which are file groups. But these are a little strange, so I just wanted to briefly cover them. You have PBX resource build phase, which is copy bundle resources. Pretty simple. PBX sources build phase, so you're compiling all your sources. Xcode doesn't actually have the names the same. PBX frameworks build phrase is actually linked binary with libraries. That's a good one. A lot of people usually get merge conflicts in this one because frameworks, people adding them. And then you have your shell script build phrase. So anytime you're running a script as part of your build process, it's called this. And one thing to note, so this is the CocoaPods resources build phase, shell script build phrase. And one thing to note is that this shell script thing in the bottom, and then what follows is the actual escaped contents of your shell script. So these aren't anywhere except your project file. They're within the project file, which is why anytime you add one of these, you're like, where is it going? It's here. So you have to be kind of careful if you ever wondered, why do I have to escape these things? Why is it not like it when I use double quotes, single quotes? That's because it's actually just literally copied into your project file. So that was it of the PBX proj. It's a file tree There's IDs for everything, which is the most important thing. If you only leave here knowing one thing, it's that everything has an ID. And yeah, it's actually not that hard. But XC user data is actually much more fun, in my opinion, because, I don't know, it's different. No, we don't ever have conflicts there, so everyone likes talking about it more. And this is all user-specific info. So you have this XC user data D thing. That is exactly what you expect it to be. It's another special folder. And what does it contain? It contains schemes and breakpoints. So for some reason, your build phases are in the project file, but if you have a shared scheme, it is not. Schemes are in a separate place. They're user-level schemes and project-level schemes. And probably one of my favorite things is the XC scheme management.plist, because it just lists your schemes. It's just a cool thing. And this will show up if you ever manage schemes. This is where that data comes from. Because everything inside Xcode comes from within all of these folders. And again, this literally contains an array of schemes. If you change the order in the array and reload Xcode, it shows up in the new order. And then obviously they have the actual XC schemes. These are also really, really simple. Like, this is the entire scheme for an app. That's it. That's just plain old XML. Well, it's a plist, but plists are XML. And the thing I wanted to note here, because schemes are not always shared, and you think there would be some really, complicated thing for indicating that schemes are shared, but it has this little underscore hashtag up caret thing, and that's the only way you know it's shared, unless it's in a different folder. So yeah, this is useful. And in case you weren't aware of what scheme editing looks like in Xcode, it's this. It just has a bunch of information on it. But the specific XC user data is usually get ignored. So this is not something you usually check in, because this is supposed to be private to your user. So most frequently, you'll have XC shared data, which is pretty much the exact same thing, and it just has schemes. You won't really have the breakpoints here, because breakpoints are usually user level, not profile level. And again, this is XML, and it looks exactly the same. If you move a scheme and you share it, it will literally copy from the XC user data into XC shared data. It's the exact same file. It just moves it from one place to the other. It's really not doing anything fancy. None of this is fancy, is what I'm trying to get at. And you never want to ignore these, because Xcode will complain, continuous integration will complain, your coworkers will complain. So don't do that. So I kind of gave an overview of the different parts of the project file and the parts inside of it, because there's a lot going on. And hopefully there's some order to the madness that we all think is there, but really isn't. So just to reiterate, the PBXproj, it's a plist. You can open it in a plist. If you want to use plutil, I love it myself. Plutil can actually turn that into JSON, but Xcode can't read JSON, so don't do that. But if you want to play around with it in JSON, you can do that too. XCWorkspace is just XML. XC shared data has some plists. XC user data also has some plists. So it's plists all the way down, XML plists, ASCII plists. But I know a lot of people, the only time they care about the project file is when stuff breaks. And so I'm going to talk very, very briefly about Git, because everybody hates merge conflicts. And this is like the #1 culprit of developer pain. I don't know anyone who's never had some weird thing happen with the project file, and it's just like, you know what, I'm just going to undo everything and then redo it again, because you don't want to go through and have to edit this. So when you're dealing with merge conflicts, whether it's just the little arrowy ones, or if it's like failed to merge and you have a patch and you're like, what the fuck is a patch? Except patches are really cool, so check them out. So remember, the PBXproj, Apple does a really good job of commenting it. So if you've never opened one up, which I'm surprised at, if you've never opened one up and had to fix a merge conflict, check the comments, because above every single section, it'll tell you what this thing is. It'll say, hey, this is the framework header search paths, or this is the, my app target. But if you have, the most common thing that people usually get merge conflicts on is if two people added the same file. So you have, someone added a new launch image, and then you added the new launch image. So the key with that is picking just one of the two UIDs. So Xcode doesn't care if there's extra data in this file. If there is a key that represents something that is not used anywhere else, Xcode doesn't care. But if you're listing out the copy resources, an image is in copy, yeah, let's copy it, and Xcode can't find it, Xcode gets really unhappy. So pick one UID if you're going to be deleting stuff, and make sure that that UID is everywhere. And since you now know that there's the copy bundle resources build phase, you can go and check to make sure that if your image is there, you should be able to check. And then rebase early and often. This is probably what will save you the most pain. I know rebasing is not the best thing, and there are some really good GUI tools these days to help with this, because Xcode still is really, really, really bad at it, so don't use the Xcode editor. So this is, kind of the way that I've found to reduce the most merge conflicts as possible. And that's all I had to say about the project file. Thanks. Okay. I see hands for questions already. There's one all the way up in the corner. That corner. So you're asking about work. Okay, so the question was about working copies when you're dragging into the project, and I'm assuming that's the copy versus not copy thing.
No, it's
no.
If you drag a Git repository into your project, Xcode knows that it's a Git repository, and it appears under the source control.
Yes. Okay. So the question was, where does Xcode know about Git repositories? And I actually wasn't able to find that information in the PBXproj. So I'm assuming Xcode is doing something behind the scenes, because there's no, your project file doesn't care that it's under version control. Xcode only cares about it's under version control. So I'm assuming that Xcode is doing something behind the scenes, looking for a .git or a .svn in the directory, and then reading the changes from there. That is correct. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Hi. I think most of the conflicts I see in Git usually happen in the PBX file reference section, because all the files that you add to a project are just all in the same kind of giant dictionary.
List. Yep.
Yeah. So do you have any strategies for how to avoid merge conflicts other than creating sub-projects for everything?
Well, sub-projects are a pain, so I don't recommend those. If you're going to do multiple projects, at least use a workspace, because you can add files to one and it won't affect the other, which is why workspaces are great. And, I mean, part of that is a failing on Git's end, because if you're at line 112 and you add a file and someone else adds a file on line 112, Git's going to see that as a conflict, even though in reality, if you're adding two different files, you just want to append. And this is where some of the Git GUI tools really come in handy, that let you choose one and then choose the other. Because the way that Git changes are kept, it's a line number. So if you ever actually look at what a raw commit information is, it has to do with the line number and then the contents that have changed. So that's when the merge conflict happened, is when you have two change sets that touch the same line. And Xcode's not that great at that, so it ends up just being, if two people add two different files, just take them both, is, I guess, the easiest way to do it. And if you're adding the same file, pick one UID and then use that one everywhere.
Can you mention any of the GUI tools you'd recommend?
So Tower is really good. I have a lot of people. I know a lot of people, especially designers, people who are much more visually focused, like it. GitHub for Mac has gotten also pretty good if you're using GitHub. And I've also heard if you want a free one, I think that last one, which I think is SourceTree. SourceTree. I know some people who really like merging in SourceTree. Cool. Well, thank you all for coming. Have a good afternoon.